Happy 4th of July in Soccer We Trust YouTube fam. We have a very special episode coming your way. So hit like and subscribe and turn on those notifications if you haven't already. And let's get after it. Yes. What is up, everybody? Welcome to Brian McBride's favorite podcast in Soccer We Trust. I'm Jimmy Conrad alongside Heath Pearce and Charlie Davies. And in honor of July 4th, our country's birthday, a country, by the way, that has officially been around for 246 years, and we still don't have a men's World Cup trophy to show for it. Though a shout out to our women's national team who have won the World Cup 4 out of the 8 times it's been held. What? They're absolute bosses, and we love to see it. But we're going to reminisce about our favorite moments in U.S. men's national team history because there's way too many moments in U.S. women's national team history. So, Heath, I'm going to come to you first. Like, what was that one moment for you that changed everything from a U.S. men's national team perspective?
I wouldn't say, I do think it was a transformative moment, but I wouldn't say necessarily for the, it's more that it changed me. It was my biggest moment for me with regard to the national team history. And that was going back to 2002 World Cup opener against Portugal, where the U.S. came out flying and then held on in the end to win 3-2 against Portugal. And I grew up in a part of California where a lot of farmers, right? A lot of farm hands, a lot of farmers, mostly Portuguese, Mexican, and so Portugal was a big hit back home. And I wasn't even home, but I remember growing up with these guys. I was on the East Coast, and the game kicked off at 5:00 in the morning. And I don't know where you guys were at when that tournament started, but that was the first sort of two-nation co-hosted World Cup. But the kickoff times were insane. And this one was at 5:00 in the morning on the East Coast, would have been 2:00 in the morning on the West Coast. And I remember just planning my entire summer. I would have been 17 years old at the time, planning my entire summer around how I'm going to get enough sleep to get up and watch these games and not watch them passively, watch them intently. And then I remember, going up a goal very early on in that game and then holding on into that match. And then obviously there's a tail to that, where we go on to beat Mexico, to reach the Quinta Partido and all that sort of stuff. But for me, it was like an eye-opening moment that, this was the era of early Landon Donovan, early DeMarcus Beasley. The U.S. was ranked pretty good at going into this tournament, but they didn't qualify very well. They didn't play great against Poland in the tournament. So I go back to that initial opener.
But did you have a personal connection with DeMarcus and Landon? Did you go to any camps with them or?
No, so I'd never been in any camps with them. But when I went into the residency program, DeMarcus Beasley was the last one there from his group. He was still finishing high school, so he spent 1 semester with us, training with us, coming in and out. He was one of the early actually, DeMarcus Beasley's brother, I think, was the first ever Project 40 signing. But DeMarcus was a Project 40 signing, was a huge hype. He had won one of the awards at the U17 World Cup. I think Landon won the Golden Ball, and he won something else. Or Golden Boot, Golden Ball, one of those between them. So he was this like incredible player, and he was like giving players shoes. And when he stayed with us, he had this room full of Air Maxes, and he was just the DeMarcus that you knew if you ever went out with him for a night on the town. That he was very generous, took care of you. And so to see him now make that leap just a couple years later to the first team national team, and then play in a World Cup was a massive thing. And that was my only connection, other than the fact that I was obsessed with John O'Brien and a number of these players that you heard about, right? Because you didn't have a lot of access to these guys. And so to watch them do that, I think was a real eye-opener for me that, wow, this is amazing. You guys are going to kill me for this, but I went full Kit Wanker for all the matches with my youth national team stuff. And in between, when we went in between games and stuff, we would do these rollouts with me and my friends. I don't know, Charlie, Kurt Morsink, right? Yeah. So Kurt, So Kurt Morsink and I would living together in Bradenton, going into a PDL season summer, and we'd walk out and do these walkouts out of the tunnel, playing FIFA games and stuff in the mornings in between games. Why we were proper loopy just because of the kickoff times. But I remember this. And again, it was the game, it was the experience, it was me and friends just gathered around in the most absurd hours to watch a World Cup, and that to me, to see them go on. Obviously, the game in itself only set them up to get out of the group. They lose to Poland in the third game. They sneak out with South Korea, and then they go on to what I think was sort of arrive on the stage. We obviously had a lot of bumps along the road since then, but for me, growing up, dreaming, seeing DeMarcus Beasley do it, and all of that, it was just the biggest moment in my career outside of the women's side, when I had a player from my hometown play for the the 99ers and Tisha Venturini. And there's so many other things. I mean, I want to, once I hear your guys' stories, I want to kind of discuss some honorable mentions because it was really hard to break down. But yeah, that to me was the biggest moment for me as a player, going like, oh man, I want to do this. I want to make it. Look at this moment. Look at the fans going crazy. Look at them celebrating. This is our national team who had previous to that kind of was just, it was always a dream to play for the national team, but it didn't have this whole, like, we didn't have the recognition of what that meant, what that stood for. And it was finally, at least in my inner circles, reaching beyond that. I was living with a Venezuelan family. They heard about it. And other people were just sort of like, it finally kind of went beyond me and my small group of friends. And that was a real validating moment.
No, I think the ripple effects of that result are probably what we'll dive into after we talk about everybody's. All right, Chuck, what do you got for us?
It's 2002. That was a World Cup similar to Heath, where it was exciting to wake up at 5 a.m. And in particular, the game, round of 16, Mexico, you don't really plan to play your arch rival in a World Cup in a knockout game. And I remember just having to wake up so early. 94 kind of set the tone for me. That's when I was exposed to the game. I was obsessed, watching them get out of a group. I was like, oh, wow, U.S., there's some hype in this sport, in this country. The 1999 Women's World Cup was also pretty special because it's on ABC. It felt like finally people were paying attention to the sport outside of, the men's game. I felt like the women's run to the World Cup trophy really galvanized the country to say, hey, we can come together to support the sport, support women. But Mia Hamm was like, that was a thing for me. I was like, oh, she's a striker. She's beautiful. Like I was all about that World Cup. But 2002, that was transformative because now we're getting to a quarterfinal. And I think that really changed the expectation and it also gave us hope. So for me, it's that Mexico game.
Hey, by the way, Charlie, by the way, and I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying, but there was also a 2:30 a.m. kickoff, a 7 a.m. kickoff. It was like on the East Coast. Like I think we played South Korea in the middle of the night at 2:30 a.m., which is insane.
Clint Mathis. That's what I think of.
Yeah.
But and then selfishly beating Spain in the Confederations Cup, that was a magical moment because they had been unbeaten. They go on to win the World Cup the next year. I think that moment resonates with a lot of us because it finally put us at that level of, oh, wow, we can win a World Cup. We always talk about, oh, the U.S. has all these athletes. But after that game, it was really a reality that if you go in with the right tactical game plan, you don't have to have 10 Xavis and 10 Fernando Torres on the pitch to win. If you play the game right and you tactically are sound, you can win a World Cup because we have that quality. So that was pretty cool to win that match and be in a FIFA final. So I'd say selfishly, I'd love that game. But for me, it's that 2002 Mexico match where we won 2-0.
Hey, just to add a little context, Jimmy, on that Confederations Cup for everybody that's listening. So we open. We have Italy, we have Brazil, and we have
Egypt
in the group. So we lose to Italy. Giuseppe Rossi, who is a traitor, scores against us.
Okay. He played well that game. I remember.
He had a banger that went from like outside to inside and inside the post. We lose to Brazil, and we are sitting in, and maybe you have a different memory of this, Charlie. We're sitting in the meal room and pretty deflated, right? But you're also kind of like with a little bit of a perspective of like you've got Italy and Brazil in your group. What can you do, right? And we're planning flights, and there's only a few of us that are going to the Gold Cup from there. That's you and I, Charlie, I think, and maybe one more.
Mm-hmm.
And they're planning everyone's flight. So we're going into the third game pretty much out. And everyone's, again, booking flights for their vacation or where they're going to go because you've lost your first two games, and there's a 6-goal deficit that you have to be able to make up between your game and another game. So to be able to climb out of that with sort of all bets are off for the Spain game, it's certainly one that if when you're inside the camp, you realize just how big of a deal it was, because even the administrators were sort of tasked with like, we're sending everyone home, we're sending everybody on their way, we got to get ahead of this because like we've lost our first two games, and then to go on to reach a final in the Confederations Cup, I certainly think it's worth being on the list at least for most magical.
Well, you got to finish the context there, because for those that don't know, you beat Egypt 3-0. You needed Brazil to beat Italy 3-0, and that all played out.
But we're on the bench, and
pretty remarkable.
I was Charlie played. I was on the bench, and the whole discussion is, what's the score of the other game? What's the score of our game? What's the score of our other game? When we get the third, we're hearing that Brazil, Italy, that Italy's getting beat 3-0. And it's closing out. And so we're kind of all in this whole, trying to do the math and avoid like the Orlando City situation where it's about like penalties and like what's the number and all that, only to find out that we've gone through. And I think that may have been a massive motivator of like a second chance in the tournament, where you kind of, the edge is off a little bit. And then like
playing with house money.
Yeah, you're playing with house money. And then it was just a spectacle. I had to go into doping after the semifinal there against Spain. Michael Bradley was trying to fight everyone in the tunnel from the other team, the refs and everyone. Bob and Michael were fighting, but now we'd reached a massive final. And for Charlie, selfishly, from an outside perspective, sort of set the trajectory at that point for the career path that he was on and was heading on, like a real validating tournament up to that point for him going into that final.
I was on that Gold Cup team with you guys in 2009. So. And then I got a concussion, and then that was it. I didn't really recover. I was only really good for about a year, I think, of my life, and then it just kind of all fell apart. But
Jay Heap started in a final.
Oh man, I can't believe like throw in Jay Heaps. It was Kenny Cooper with me last week, and now it's you and Jay Heaps. I mean, put some respect on these guys' names.
Listen,
they had a part in.
He said, "Oh no, honestly," he said, "Jay Heaps started in the final."
Hey, I will say this. I went back and watched those highlights the other day of that final, and it was like Jay Heaps got elbowed in the face when they called that penalty. And that would have definitely been overturned in the now era, when he was sort of getting wrapped up, got an elbow, and then sort of got tripped up to give that penalty to start the second half, but then we ran away. People forget that it was 0-0 at halftime. Yeah. So let's not forget, we tied the first half.
The first half was the second half was, we won't even tell you the final score.
I was watching from France, and I remember my teammates were like, "Oh, US? What's up with them?"
Just getting slapped with 5 goals in the second half. Yeah, it's never fun. I was up top with John Hackworth. Him and I were kind of being the eyes in the sky for Bob and the coaching staff with regard to any tactical adjustments. And yeah, it was hard after that second half. Like walking down the stairs to go address everybody and to go in the locker room was tough. Because
what happened to you, Jimmy, in that tournament?
I got knocked out cold in Philadelphia against Panama in the quarterfinals. Kyle Beckerman actually scored his only one. Yeah, I got knocked out. You were there, Heath. Remember? I was like, talking gibberish in the locker room.
I literally flew out just before that game. We got to Philadelphia after the first round, and we were playing in the knockout phase, and that's when I got my move to France. So I flew. That's right. Literally the first day we got to Philly.
So I blame Charlie.
Amazing to hear the lack of commitment. Amazing to hear the lack of commitment from Charlie.
I know. I was
my work here is done. I'm heading back to Europe, guys.
I'm out. Europe's calling. All right. So my big moment is the same. It's 2002. I thought transformative is a great word to use in describing that, because in 1998, we were the worst team in the World Cup out of 32 teams. And 94 had so much hope. And we came out of that going, hey, we got out of our group. It was a tough group. We hosted it. Now we're going to go over to Europe. We're going to really put our flag in the ground and let everybody know that we are the real deal. And we're going to build off of what we did in 94. And it didn't happen. And in fact, we were not very good. There was a lot of inner turmoil within the team. There just was not a lot of good vibes around that particular group of players. And the performances, I think, displayed that as well. So you go into 2002, and to Heath's point, first 30 minutes against Portugal, you're like, all right, this is already different. The vibes are different here. This is a different group. We got some exciting young players. We're going out there putting our best foot forward. And I think what I took out of that particular tournament, now I was in MLS at the time, and 2 of my teammates were on the team with Jeff Agus and Landon Donovan. So to have that kind of touch point, and we had just won MLS Cup in 2001. So coming off of that success and feeling good about it, then sending these guys off to go represent us in a World Cup was very, very cool. And gave me more of a touch point than I'd ever had before. 94, I was a kid like you guys, and just, this is just so amazing, and really starting to absorb all the energy and enthusiasm around the sport and all the different cultures that were there. And then in 98, there was that hype and being disappointed that we didn't do more with it. And then obviously I was very excited about this group. So it just felt like in this, when we played the teams, even the host Korea, Poland, I think, was the one blip where we didn't play particularly well. It's almost like we had everything in our hands, and we hadn't been in that situation before, and we let it go. But thankfully, we got a little bit of help to get into the knockout rounds. And then against Mexico, and then against Germany in the quarterfinals as well. We should have got more out of that 1-0 result that we lost than we did. If VAR had been around, Torsten Frings would have gotten a red card for the handball on the goal line by our now coach, Greg Berhalter. So the fine margins were worked against us there, but I think what we proved was that we could hang with anybody in the world. And that felt really refreshing and positive and hopeful. And that was exciting. And then little did I know 4 years later, I'd be part of a very similar group, a lot of the same players. And then we kind of fell back into a little bit of disappointment as we tried to manage the expectations of being we're not underdogs anymore. But 2010, I think we got to bring up the Algeria goal that Landon scores, because right off of you guys having that success in the Confederations Cup, I think there was, again, that belief that we can do something special. So for him to score that late and for us to win our first ever group at a World Cup is incredibly significant. And unfortunate that we ran into Ghana in the next round, who were kind of our bogey team at that time in World Cups, because we lost to them in 2006 as well. But there are all these little moments along the way that continue to give belief and to give inspiration to the next generation. And I assume the kids that are playing now were of a certain age back in 2010 and 2014, that they are like, hey, we're getting out of groups. We have the potential. We can hang with anybody. And I'd love to hear from these guys after or during or before, just how important those moments and visuals were that they could be a part of this in the future and to make a big difference. And so, because that's what those World Cups did for us. That's what 2002 did for all of us. Even though I was a little bit older than you guys, it gave me the belief that, hey, I've got a couple teammates on the World Cup team. I'm not that far away. I just have to put a couple things together and get out of my own way, because that was my biggest issue, was getting out of my own way. And I think I could get there because I can see the quality that these guys have. I just have to make sure I can get to that point as well. And it's so important for our players. That's why I think not qualifying for 2018 was such a big deal, because we missed out on a generation of kids that are coming up to see what it looks like and feels like and tastes like to have your country in a World Cup and have that type of representation, and to show them that we can play and hang with the best countries in the world.
Was there a moment, and this is a sort of on biggest moments for you personally, that changed your perspective or gave you a little bit of anger or desire to say, I want to be part of that? Because when I look back and I think about, I got called in for the Copa America, and as I was arriving, I had just heard that the U.S. had I'd arrived in Chicago to fly to obviously to Venezuela, and I had just heard that this U.S. team had won the Gold Cup, and I was watching it on a screen at the hotel bar, and it's Benny Philhaber running to the corner and someone pulling his shirt. It's that iconic shot of Benny and the crowd just basically being full Mexico, and just this moment of running it late. And I remember feeling like I'm about to get on a plane with a lot of these guys who have now experienced something different than me. And it angered me. Like, I was so excited because Benny was one of my good friends, and I was excited for the team. And it's a huge moment going into another tournament or just for our own credibility as a national team. But deep down inside, I was like on fire. And I went down and ended up, Johnny Bornstein ended up starting 2 of the 3 games at Copa America. And I was just like, I don't want to feel this anymore. I don't want to feel like I need to control what I can control, but I want to make sure that I'm like locking myself at least in contention for this national team, and then making a tough decision for Bob. And that Gold Cup 2007 was the one that did it for me, where like I thought about it for days and days and days of just being like, I don't want to miss out on that again. Obviously, in the end, I end up missing out on going to the World Cup in 2010, but it was a real motivator for me to say, like, you're going to have to improve. You're going to have to like kind of grasp this a little bit tighter and do a little bit more. If you want to be able to be in person to experience special moments with the national team, which ultimately got me to the Confederations Cup and another Gold Cup and things like that. And that was a real turning point for me of being like, oh, I wasn't invited to the party, and I want to be invited to the party next time. Either of you have a moment or something you saw on TV, because everybody knows you watch club games or you watch national team games in person, it feels different for both of you. I know it does, right? If you're sitting in person, you watch the national team play versus watching your old club team play, there's a little bit of something going on. That's harder to digest, harder to interpret, harder to know, like positive, negative, like tears of joy, kind of mixed emotions.
I'll go first, Charlie. I got a call from Bob Bradley a couple months before that summer of 2007 where we were going to have back-to-back tournaments where we played in the Gold Cup and then immediately went down to Copa America. And that was going to take me away from my club team and my family for 8 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks. That's a big ask. But of course, what are you going to say no to the national team coach when he's going to ask you to be, at that point, a pivotal member of his starting squad and to be part of it? And I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm all the way in, Bob. No problem. And when I got home, this was maybe 2 weeks before my first daughter was born. So my first daughter's born, and obviously you have your own emotions. And I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but you have your own dad issues of maybe what your dad didn't do when you were a kid and you want to fill that void. So I was a little bit maybe over the top and like wanting to be there and be the guy for my daughter because I didn't get as much of that when I was younger. And so I had that kind of factoring in. And now you add into the fact that my wife she doesn't want to be left alone with the baby by herself for 8 or 9 weeks. And so we're trying to figure out ways to get our moms to come in, my mother-in-law and my mom to come in and potentially help. And it was just so stressful at home. I got a hamstring injury. I never got hamstring injuries. You guys knew I took pretty good care of myself. I did a lot of yoga, did all that stuff. And I just never wanted to, risk putting my body at risk so I wouldn't miss anything. And I had a hamstring and I had to tell Bob I'm out for the Gold Cup. So when I didn't go, but I showed up in Chicago, just like you did, Heath, I was absolutely irate that I was not part of that group because like you, I missed a part of an experience that not only was shared by the players, but also the coaching staff. Because the coaching staff goes, oh, I guess we don't really need Jimmy anymore to win pivotal games. And those little things hurt. So I go down to Copa America and we don't play particularly well, but there was this one play against Argentina where Bob blamed me. But ultimately I was kind of trying to step into a space because we were tired. We were chasing the game the whole time. And I tried to make something happen and they exploited the gap and scored. And he held that against me. I played the next game. He held something else against me. And then I didn't play for the national team for the next 18 months. And there was no direct conversation between me and Bob as to why that happened. So anytime the team played, I was starting to get more and more bitter. And I was happy for you guys in terms of the Confederations Cup. But again, I felt this, I don't know what the word, it's not jealousy per se, but I wanted to be a part of it because I thought I was good enough and should have been a part of that group, but I wasn't. And that hurt me a lot. And then I had the chance of the Gold Cup, and then I get that bad concussion. I just couldn't get that run that I needed to get in. But it's weird because I want to support you guys as players, and I want us to win. But I also know that if you're not winning, that gives me a better chance to get into the team. How about you, Charlie?
Yeah, the 2010 World Cup. You work your whole life to participate in a World Cup. That's the goal. And I made a bad decision in 2009 that led to me being involved in a car accident. And so, I was a passenger and someone, fatally passed away and tragically passed away in that car accident. And so my initial reaction was, first was, when can I get back on the field? Because for me, I had everything looking forward. I had felt that my future was kind of set for me. I had this path, I had this destiny. I was on a roll. I was moving at the speed of light. And it just felt like with every opportunity I had to play on the pitch, I just kept growing and getting better and better. And I craved that level of competition from the Confederations Cup. I wanted to be playing Spain every week. I wanted to be playing with and against those players every week. And so, you realize all of a sudden that life is much different than you had kind of expected it to be. And you took a lot of things for granted. And so my initial feeling was I have to make this up to my family, my teammates, the coaches, the fans. And so I'm working through all this pain, and I feel like I deserved it because I put myself in that situation, and I didn't want to feel pity. I didn't want to feel, I didn't want anything from anybody. I wanted to take that pain for myself. And I'm grateful for the support that I had around me, my wife, Gucci Onyewu was there next to me because he tore his patella tendon in that game against Costa Rica. And then James Hashimoto, who was the trainer for the national team, that's who I went to basically live with, and he was training me. And then Stu Holden would come in every now and then because he had some injuries. So I kept pushing and pushing, and as impossible as it was that doctors doubted that I'd be able to play soccer again, period. As impossible as it was to get back for this World Cup, that's what was driving me every day. And I was doing 10-hour days of rehab. And, it started with just standing up, started with just being able to hold my leg up in the air. And so I just kept progressing. And about 4 months in, I was able to start jogging on the Ultra G machine. And I'm like, oh man, this could be a reality. And I was doing, agility, and my quickness was still there on the agility, but we all know that agility is not how you play the game of soccer. That's just a small portion of it. So I'm finally back in training in France, and I'm pushing, I'm forcing it. I'm like, I'm going to get a call to the camp. And that's all I really cared about, was just getting to the camp. I knew making the 23 was not probably realistic, although I had hoped that maybe I'd be that 23rd player and I could just be there and kind of do the training and rehab. And maybe by the end of the World Cup, I might be able to be an impact sub. And so finally I get that call from Bob in May, a week before they had to submit, or maybe it might've been a day before they had to submit the 35-man roster. And he just said, everyone's proud of you. You've come a long way, but we knew this moment we were going to have this talk at some point. And so I'm not going to be able to take you to the camp. And so you have that pain, and that was rock bottom for me at that time. I had not experienced even through the accident, all that. That was the moment that it hits you. The consequences, you paid the consequences, the ultimate consequence, not getting a World Cup and probably never going to get to participate in the World Cup. So then you're watching them, right? So I go on vacation right off after he tells me I'm not going to join the team. So I go to Bahamas to get away. My wife says, you know what? Let's just get away from people, soccer. Let's go enjoy. Everyone in the Bahamas has a World Cup jersey on. There were players who were also cut from their World Cup rosters. I remember Aquilani from Italy. He got cut from the team, and he's there. So you're constantly around. I'm like, you can't avoid it. So I go back to Delaware to rehab, and we're watching the games. I go back to France for preseason, and Alejandro Bedoya comes to visit me for my birthday, and we watch the Algeria game, and I just remember being like, oh my God. And I'm so happy for them, but every game is painful. I feel like, man, that was my opportunity to really help this team win. And you watch the Ghana game, you're like, if I was there, I would have finished that. Or if I was there, I would have made that run, and you're doing that. But after that Algeria game, they called me from the locker room, and that will always sit, that will always sit with me in terms of, wow, they still thought of me in that moment. Mm-hmm. And, yeah.
Who called? Do you know who was the catalyst?
Yeah, it was Mo and Josie, and then Landon and Stu got on, and then it kind of that was passed around, and everybody was saying what's up, and they're doing they're like, oh, we're doing the stanky leg for you on the field. And so any time I watched the US game, I had like a pit in my stomach, literally. Every time I watched them up until the day I retired, because I was working. Even after I got back and playing in MLS and I was never the same player, I always felt like, man, I think I can earn a January call up, and that would be heaven for me, right? Like full circle. I got back, and January camp is great because there was that run I had in 2014. I scored 7 goals in a short amount of time to get to MLS Cup finals. I felt like, oh man, new coach, maybe Jurgen Klinsmann gives me an opportunity as a January camp guy. I didn't get it. 2015, I was like, I'm still pushing. 2016, I'm like, I'm still pushing. I just want that one chance. And then, I get diagnosed with cancer, and my boys were born 3 months early, and then I hit the peak and came down. And so right when that happened, and the dream is gone, then I'm like, oh, that pit has gone, and I can just be a supporter and be a fan. But I've felt that my whole life, to be honest, up from that point.
That's That's a crazy story in a lot of different ways. I was with you in 2009 and in that camp when the car accident happened, and it still feels super surreal. And I was in that January camp in 2010 when you came to visit. I don't think you were training with us, but you came to say hello, and I could see your sadness just written all over your body language, and not really knowing what to say, because I didn't know what to say. We were all hopeful that you'd get on the team, or at least come
Well,
back.
contextually, Jimmy.
Were you there at that camp in January 2010, Heath?
Yes.
Yeah.
And contextually, Charlie is a prankster, loud. You can hear him on the bus. You can hear him in the locker room. Like, he's alive. He's the energy of a team. Like, he's not a quiet guy. And I remember that also, Jimmy, just the how quiet Charlie was, compared to the Charlie that we had known for so long. And I remember all of that distinctly.
Yeah, it was an intense time, and obviously we had our own stuff going on, Heath, but I remember thinking that I couldn't imagine what it would be like.
So, it's not that bad.
No, well, it wasn't that. It was more, I just couldn't imagine what you were going through to process just the accident in general. I mean, you have your own kind of career ambitions that are attached to what happened in that accident, but also just the trauma of what you went through in that. And I can't even imagine what did you, I don't know how much you want to open into this, but
go ahead.
But like, in terms of like,
book, so
therapy. I mean, did you go talk to a psychologist? Like,
yeah, no,
because you're working with two different things here, where you realize that you've maybe really hampered your dream moving forward, but then also there's this personal side where I almost just died, and somebody did die in this, and that has its own place where you can't. I don't think you can compartmentalize that away. I think you have to walk through that a little bit as well, and then obviously that's going to play into how you probably approach your dream as you try to work through it. Can I ever be as good as I was? Because as you mentioned, and it's not hyperbole here, Charlie was on it. I mean, you were destined to be our number 9 at the 2010 World Cup, or to be our strike partner with Josie Altuve. Like, it was all set up for you were on a rocket ship. And so you had to handle like two different things. And so,
well, also, Jimmy, contextually, it happened in a World Cup camp, a World Cup qualifying camp. Right,
yes,
Charlie?
That's right.
Like, this was this was the national team. It was very close to home to everything that was going on in your life. It was the qualifying camp.
Mm-hmm. So I would tell you, one, I never went to see a psychologist. When I was in the hospital, and I had the priest come in every day, and he would remind me how lucky I am to be alive. He'd ask me, had you seen that car? Had I seen the car that I was in? I said, no. And he said, people usually don't walk away from that. You have, and just know there's a bigger plan for you. You may not know it. You may not know why. A lot of people will say why or how, but just know there is, and just make the most of it. Right? You have a second chance at life. And that's how I approached it. I said, I'm not going to think about the what ifs, but I did. I mean, that kept me up at night for about 4 months of, why did I make that decision? You could go back all the, from going out to dinner with Stu Holden to watch Monday Night Football. And from that point on, like, no need to, you could go down the list. And so for me, I just said, the only thing I can control is how I am as a person, how I wake up every day, how I'm going to make the people around me better. And so I literally just focused on the rehab. That's and the pain that I was taking from the rehab, and all the pain I felt, and the embarrassment. And as you talked about how I was quiet, it's because I just felt ashamed. I felt like I let so many people down, and I know I let so many people down. So how could I be the same person? I'm still a shell of myself anyways. I'm still trying to build myself back up. And so I was at that point still processing everything. And you can imagine how emotional I felt being around everybody. Yeah, it felt great to see you all and talk to everybody, but it's still so emotional. It's raw. And so I guess my therapy really was just talking to my wife, Nina, talking to Hash every day. And I'm very fortunate that they were always by my side, but I just kept pushing. And that's the only way that I was able to stay positive, was like, I got my mind solely focused on getting back. And the whole reason and intention for me to get back on the field was I felt that was going to be a way to make up for it to all you guys. If I could get back on the field and produce that, man, and I have this new like appreciation for life, that was going to be enough for all of you to be like in the locker room, and Bob and the coaching staff to be like, man, Charlie, he proved us right. You know, he is that person, and he made up for it because he made up for that mistake because he showed us with his commitment to the team and commitment to us that he was going to get back on the field for us. That was my thinking.
That's a really powerful way, that having that singular focus, I think, can drive you to do some things that maybe got you farther along than you would have otherwise.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that approach, and we love you, Chuck. We're glad that you're still here with us. And
hey,
Thank
Jimmy,
you.
on a lighter note, real quick to wrap this thing up, Charlie, did you ever consider playing for Ghana?
You know, Gambia came into the picture late, and Ireland.
Okay.
You know, that I went to play in a Region 1 tournament in Austria. You know, there's Manchester United there, Austria, Japan, Stuttgart, all these clubs. I scored a bike, had a good tournament. I scored a couple more goals. And a Manchester United scout called my home, and my dad picked up, and he asked, like, what's Charlie's passport situation? Could he come over to the academy and train for a little bit? And I was like, oh my God, Manchester United called my house. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, oh, I can be a professional, and not only be a professional, but good. And so my dad's calling Gambia, calling about passports. And they're like, oh, if you get a Gambian passport, you can't play for England. I mean, you can't, that doesn't count. Doesn't do anything for you in England. So I was like, damn. And then we're like, what about Ireland? And they're like, no, your grandparents have to be born in Ireland, not your great grandparents. And I was like,
you would have been Charlie O. Davies.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I meant to make Gambia there. No.
Yeah.
All right, now last final thoughts before we say goodbye to this very special July 4th episode. We honor our birthday of our country with some of our favorite moments in U.S. men's national team history. Any honorable mentions? And Charlie, I'll come to you first. I mean, we talked about 2002 and how important it was for us. I mentioned the 2010 goal by Landon against Algeria, which helped us win our first ever group. Anything that you think we're missing that we should be discussing with regard to this conversation?
The Colombia game in the 94 World Cup.
A good one.
You know, you can watch the two Escobars, the 30 for 30 that goes with that game.
Yeah, amazing.
I would say, yes. The Portugal game in 2002, is what Heath touched on. Although the Mexico game, you know, is the knockout game. So I guess, and it's our rival. That's why it stood out to me. I'd say the 2010, Algeria game. Other than that, there's not the 2014 game against Portugal, you know, probably should have won. I really say that's it. And then, we covered the U.S. women's 99, the 99ers, how special that was. I don't have another moment that sticks out to me. I feel like we touched everything. Yeah,
there's one, Heath. I was going to bring up just for historical purposes. We did upset England at the 1950 World Cup. Yeah. So not that
Jimmy was the only one watching that.
Yeah,
game.
He was 10.
I was up at 2 a.m. in the morning watching that. No, it's I was 10. It took us another 40 years to qualify for a World Cup. So I guess we should bring in Paul Caligiuri's goal against Trinidad to help us qualify for that 90
Shot heard around the world.
It's a really important goal in our history to get us back into that type of conversation and to qualify for World Cups and give us that belief that we had the quality to once 40 years without qualifying is pretty significant, especially for a country our size. So, but we should mention that the 1950 World Cup, we did have our flag in the ground at some point that we could be a force to be reckoned with. It just took us 40 years to wake up again.
Jimmy, my last honorable mention would be that same sort of group. And it's a little bit of me personally, but also the generational push that I think kicked off. Remember Project 2010? We don't have to get into it because we know it didn't work out, but it was what started the residency program, which then eventually led to 18 players to 20 players to 40 players to 60 to then MLS academies launching and all these things. It was sort of the early point of development when that born in 82 group of Bobby, I guess he was in 83, but Bobby Convey, Landon Donovan, DeMarcus Beasley, and a number of these guys Oguchi Onyewu went and finished fourth at the Youth World Cup. I think that was a huge, huge moment for anybody who was at least involved in the ODP program to be like, okay, something's working here. And I think that was a massive push for this idea that we have some raw material that exists around the country. It's going to take a long time to figure out how we're going to shape and mold that and discover that, shape and mold that. But I think if you look at that and the fact that we have a quality of a generation that only went and lived together for a year and a half to then finish fourth in a youth World Cup against some of the best teams in the world, I think that was another big moment for me that that's worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the 2000 Olympics, we had a team that got to the bronze medal match. They ended up losing to Spain 3-1 in the semifinals, but got to that in Sydney down in Australia, got to the bronze medal match and ended up losing 2-0. But that was a coming out party for a lot of players as well. You had Landon, you had Wolfie was down there, and Jeff Agus, and that was a good team. And DeMarcus and everybody, they had a good squad. And it was just kind of already building on what you were saying before. So we should give them a nod because that was a pretty pivotal moment for that group as well. And I think, and potentially because it was in 2000, maybe gave a little bit of a spark of belief for the Landons and DeMarcuses that they could go on the world stage and obviously perform at the highest level in 2002. So, all right, everybody, that is today's show. We are done and dusted. I hope you're having a great 4th of July or whenever you're listening to this. Thank you for all the subscribes and likes and subscriptions and all that good stuff. We really appreciate you. Happy birthday to our country. So on behalf of Des and Alex, our producers, and Charlie Chuck Wagon Davies and Hollywood Heath Pearce, I'm Jimmy Cream Cheese Conrad saying thank you for listening to In Soccer We Trust, and we will see you next time. Later.